Genesis chapter 5 and verse 21. And Enoch lived 65 years and begot Methuselah. And Enoch walked with God after he had begotten Methuselah 300 years and begot sons and daughters. And all the days of Enoch were 365 years. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. In 2 Kings chapter 2. 2 Kings chapter 2 and verse 1, And it came to pass, when Jehovah would take up Elijah into the heavens by a whirlwind, that Elijah went with Elisha from Gilgal. And Elijah said to Elisha, Abide here, I pray thee, for Jehovah has sent me to Bethel. And Elisha said, As Jehovah liveth, and as thy soul liveth, I will not leave thee. So they went down to Bethel, and the sons of the prophets that were at Bethel came forth to Elisha, and he said to them, Dost thou not know, Jehovah will take away thy master from over thy head today? And he said, I also know it, be silent. And Elijah said to him, Elisha, abide here, I pray thee, for Jehovah hath sent me to Jericho. And he said, As Jehovah liveth, and as thy soul liveth, I will not leave thee. And they came to Jericho, and the sons of the prophets that were at Jericho drew near to Elisha, and said to him, Dost thou not know that Jehovah will take away thy master from over thy head today? And he said, I also know it, be silent. We've been speaking a little today about the fact of translation as to the rapture. And I was wondering what kind of material, what kind of persons God is going to translate. What kind of men is He going to take into heaven to dwell with Him eternally? And these two Old Testament characters are two men, we might say, who were translated. They were taken to heaven. And I wondered what were the features that marked these men. What made them so acceptable to God that He considered that they were, as it were, too good for the earth, and He wanted to take them to Himself. We know, of course, in the case of Enoch, it says that he walked with God. Or as we learn in Hebrews 11, another translation is that he pleased God. He was a man who was able to afford pleasure to the heart of God. And that, of course, is seen preeminently in the person of the Lord Jesus, my beloved Son, in whom I find all my delight, all my pleasure. But God has secured men in whom He finds pleasure. He finds pleasure in their company. What a wonderful privilege this man had, that he walked with God. He lived in a world, of course, where there were many opportunities. There were great men straddling the earth, no doubt, at this time. There were many men that no doubt he could have kept company with. And what a peculiar character he must have been. A man who walked with God. It seemed to be the extent of his desires. It was wrapped up in the things in which God was interested. And I wondered in what measure these features are found with us at the present moment. What do we really know about true daily association with God, as walking with Him in communion and affording pleasure to His heart? We so often, as we said earlier today, we're so egocentric. We're always thinking of our pleasure, of our delight, and of our desires. But surely the assembly of God has been formed as a vessel that is competent, that is capable of providing pleasure and delight to the heart of God. And so we find that God looks down upon this man. He has his eye upon him. He walks with him. We know, of course, the first time that God walked, as it were, in the garden, it was because of these contrary conditions. And the heart of God says, "Where art thou?" He came to man in the cool of the day, in the most blessed time that man could be approached, when he was free from all the responsibilities of the day. But we find here in Enoch that there's a man who's available to God at all times. And surely that should be the desire of each one of our hearts. When it comes to Elijah, he of course was also a man who had this wonderful distinction that he was translated, he was carried up into heaven by a whirlwind. And you think to yourself, he knew about his translation. Others knew that the translation was about to take place. And the question is, what was the occupation of this man we might say the week before his translation? What were his desires? What did he want to do? So we read here, of course, that he goes to Gilgal, and then he goes to Bethel, and then he goes to Jordan, and then he goes to Jericho. Wonderful places of instruction, of spiritual experience, as if in a way he was gathering together all the wonderful experiences he had gained in his life and going over them again to retrace them at the close of his sojourn here. He says that first of all he goes to Gilgal, where the power of the flesh is broken. Then he goes to Bethel. After that we find that he goes to the Jordan, where he goes to Jericho, where the power of the world was completely broken and shattered. And then he goes to Jericho, where the power of death was forever broken and set aside. But in these wonderful victories, places of wonderful victory, you find, of course, that he has in mind the place Bethel, the house of God. These places seem to sum up, as it were, in a way, the desires of that man. The last few days he had on earth, he had upon his heart that he would visit these places, and he would review, no doubt, the lessons he had learned in them. And what a wonderful thing it must have been for God to look down from heaven and see a man of such a character. You remember in the days of Job, the pleasure and delight that God finds in calling attention to men who are exercised and concerned. And God says to Satan that day, he says, "Hast thou considered my servant Job a perfect and upright man, one who feareth God and who escheweth evil?" There were features in manhood that delighted the heart of God, that gave pleasure to the heart of God. And in our pathway here, in the view of the fact that no doubt the translation is not that far away, surely it should be the desire of every one of our hearts to be marked by features. If it could be marked by these men who knew nothing of the abiding presence of the Spirit of God as we do, how much more responsive and how much more fruitful should our pathway be, as affording delight and pleasure to the heart of God. We live in a world that's catered to our pleasure and our delights and our desires, and how much better it would be if our thoughts were more centred in every occasion in our lives, that we are found in such company, that we can be said of us that we walk with God in all the circumstances of our life, and in it not simply because we are supported and helped, but because we are capable of ministering pleasure to the heart of the blessed God. And I trust that these simple words might encourage our hearts. In view of our own translation, what are our occupations?